This bear was about to be put down. Now he sleeps on the couch. The wilderness of Colorado stood stark and unforgiving in the grip of early winter. Snow draped the pines like shrouds, and the wind cut through the forest with icy precision. It was in this frigid landscape that Mark Donovan, an experienced hiker who had traversed these trails for nearly 2 decades, spotted something unusual. Through the crystalline air, a dark shape, too small to be an adult bear but too large for a fox, huddled beneath a rocky outcropping. Mark approached cautiously, every step crunching in the fresh snow. The shape resolved itself into a young black bear cub, emaciated and trembling. Its hind leg was held at an awkward angle, and raw, angry scars circled its neck and midsection, unmistakable evidence of chains. The cub's eyes, normally bright with the wildness of a healthy bear, were dull and distant. It didn't run. It didn't even lift its head when Mark came within 20 feet. It simply stared with an emptiness that made Mark's chest tighten. "Hey there, little guy," Mark whispered, the vapor of his breath hanging in the cold air. The cub flinched at the sound, pressing itself further against the rocks. Mark noticed something else then, a scrap of frayed rope still dangling from the cub's neck, confirming what the scars had already told him: this was no ordinary orphan cub. This was the aftermath of human cruelty. Mark had seen bears before, this was Colorado, after all, but never one in such a state. Using the satellite phone he always carried on remote hikes, he called the local wildlife office. Within 2 hours, a team arrived with a transport cage and tranquilizers. "Jesus," breathed Wildlife Officer Sarah as she surveyed the bear cub. "Someone had this little one chained up. No wonder he's in such bad shape." The veterinarian who accompanied them, Dr. James Reeves, carefully sedated the cub and performed a preliminary examination. Male, probably around 10 months old, severely malnourished. Dr. Reeves gently probed the injured hind leg, possible fracture that healed incorrectly. Multiple lacerations and pressure wounds from restraints. He shook his head, his expression grim behind his fogging glasses. No microchip, no tags, classic case of illegal captivity. Someone probably thought it would be cool to have a bear cub as a pet, then abandoned him when he got too big. "You think they just dumped him out here to die?" Mark asked, watching as they carefully placed the sedated cub into the transport cage. The officer nodded, her jaw tight with anger. "Happens more often than you'd think. People buy exotic animals illegally, then abandon them when the reality sets in. This little guy's lucky you found him. Another week out here and he wouldn't have made it." "Where will you take him?" Mark asked. "Pine Ridge Wildlife Rescue Center," Dr. Reeves replied. "They have one of the best rehabilitation programs in the state. If anyone can help him, it's them." The next morning, Dr. Margaret Willis stood over the examination table at Pine Ridge, her experienced hands moving gently over the sedated bear cub. 15 years of wildlife rehabilitation had exposed her to countless cases of animal abuse and neglect, but each one still affected her deeply. This cub was no exception. "His body temperature is still low," she told her assistant, Javier. "Let's get him on warming pads and start 4 fluids. I want a full blood panel, X-rays of that leg, and antibiotics for these wounds." The X-rays confirmed what Dr. Willis had suspected: the cub's hind leg had been broken and had healed improperly, leaving him with a permanent limp. The blood work revealed anemia and signs of prolonged malnutrition. Most troubling, however, were the psychological indicators. Even after regaining consciousness in a safe, warm environment, the cub remained withdrawn and unresponsive. I'm going to call him Cody, Dr. Willis decided, writing the name on his chart. Naming wildlife patients wasn't standard practice, but sometimes with the most traumatized cases, it helped the staff connect with them, to see them as individuals with unique stories, rather than just another rehabilitation case. For the next 4 months, Dr. Willis and her team tried everything to help Cody recover. They provided nutritious food, enrichment toys, and a carefully designed enclosure that mimicked his natural habitat. They treated his physical wounds with attentive care. But while his body began to heal, his spirit remained broken. Cody refused to eat properly, taking only the minimum necessary to survive. He ignored the enrichment toys placed in his enclosure. He spent most of his time huddled in the farthest corner, as if trying to disappear. Most telling was his reaction to the sound of metal. When the clinking of chains or the rattling of the enclosure door would send him into a state of panic, his breathing rapid, his eyes wide with terror. Dr. Willis tried different approaches. She enlisted animal behaviorists, tried various feeding methods, even played recordings of mother bears with their cubs. Nothing worked. Cody remained locked in his trauma, unreachable. I'm starting to think he's non-releasable, Dr. Willis confided to Javier one evening as they observed Cody through the monitoring system. The bear lay curled in his usual corner, unmoving except for the shallow rise and fall of his breathing. Even if we could get him physically healthy enough, he shows no signs of developing the necessary survival behaviors. And his psychological trauma is too severe for him to function in captivity. Pine Ridge's policy was clear. Wildlife that couldn't be rehabilitated for release and wasn't suitable for captivity had to be humanely euthanized. It was a gut-wrenching reality of wildlife rehabilitation, but one that sometimes had to be faced. Schedule it for Friday, Dr. Willis said, her voice heavy with resignation. We'll give him a peaceful end. It's the kindest thing we can do at this point. Javier nodded, his eyes reflecting the same sadness. I'll make the arrangements. That night, Willis stayed late, sitting outside Cody's enclosure. The bear remained in his corner, but his eyes were open, watching her with that same empty gaze that had haunted her for months. I'm sorry, Cody, she whispered. I wish we could have done more for you. As if understanding her words, Cody turned his head away, facing the wall. The next morning, as Dr. Willis was reviewing Cody's file one last time, her office phone rang. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar Wyoming number. Dr. Willis speaking. Hello, Dr. Willis. My name is Jennifer Morrison. I'm the founder of Wild Heart Sanctuary in Wyoming. The voice on the other end was warm and confident. I'm calling about the bear cub you have, Cody. I believe one of your volunteers mentioned his case to me. Dr. Willis frowned slightly. Yes, we have a cub named Cody. He's been with us for 4 months, but I'm afraid his rehabilitation hasn't been successful. He's scheduled for euthanasia this Friday. There was a pause on the line. That's actually why I'm calling. We'd like to take him. Dr. Willis's frown deepened. Ms. Morrison, I appreciate your interest, but Cody isn't just a failed release candidate. He has severe psychological trauma. He's essentially shut down. We've had success with similar cases, Jennifer replied. Last year we rehabilitated an orphan bear cub that everyone had given up on. We have a different approach that sometimes works when traditional methods don't. Dr. Willis leaned back in her chair, skeptical but interested. What kind of approach? We have foster families, carefully selected people with appropriate facilities and experience. who work one-on-one with the most traumatized animals. We've found that sometimes the quiet environment of a home setting, away from the clinical atmosphere of a rescue center, can reach animals that seem unreachable. Foster families for a bear? Dr. Willis couldn't keep the incredulity from her voice. Jennifer chuckled. I know it sounds unorthodox, but we have a couple in mind for Cody. Tom and Linda Brennan. Tom is a retired veterinarian with 30 years of experience with large animals, and Linda was a veterinary technician. They live on a 20-acre farm with proper enclosures, and they've fostered for us before. Dr. Willis tapped her pen against Cody's file, considering. It sounded risky, possibly even irresponsible. And yet Cody was scheduled to die in 3 days. What did they have to lose? Send me their credentials and your facility documentation, she said finally. I'll review it today. By that afternoon, Dr. Willis had received and reviewed the information Jennifer sent. The Brennans were indeed impressively qualified, and Wild Heart Sanctuary had all the necessary permits and protocols in place. Still, she hesitated. Was she just prolonging Cody's suffering by sending him to another facility? Or could this unorthodox approach actually give him a chance? In the end, it was the memory of Cody's empty eyes that decided her. She couldn't give up on him without trying everything possible. All right, she told Jennifer over the phone. We'll transfer Cody to your care. But I want regular updates, and if he shows no improvement within a month, I think we need to reconsider euthanasia as the humane option. Agreed, Jennifer said. Tom and Linda will be ready for him. Thank you for giving him this chance, Dr. Willis. 2 days later, Cody was sedated and placed in a transport cage for the journey to Wyoming. Dr. Willis watched as the van pulled away from Pine Ridge. A mixture of hope and doubt swirled in her chest. She'd done everything she could for Cody. Now his fate rested in the hands of Tom and Linda Brennan. The journey to Wyoming took 6 hours, during which Cody remained sedated under the watchful eye of a veterinary technician. When they finally arrived at the Brennan farm, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the snow-covered property. Tom and Linda Brennan waited by the gate, their breath visible in the cold air. Tom stood tall and steady despite his 70 years, his weathered face framed by a neatly trimmed white beard. Linda, a few years younger, had laugh lines around her eyes and silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical braid. Between them stood a border collie with patchy black and white fur, watching the van with alert eyes. That's Rosie, Linda explained to the transport team as they carefully unloaded Cody's cage. She's a rescue too, came to us terrified of everything after being abused by her previous owner. Tom knelt to look at Cody through the cage bars. The bear cub was beginning to stir as the sedation wore off, his eyes blinking slowly, disoriented. "Oh, Tom," Linda whispered, kneeling beside her husband. He looked so lost. Indeed, even in his groggy state, Cody had pressed himself against the back of the van, trembling slightly. His ribs were visible beneath his dull fur, and his injured hind leg was tucked underneath him. "We've prepared an enclosure for him," Tom told the team. "It has a heated shelter, a small pond, climbing logs, and secure fencing. We'll move him there now while he's still calm from the sedation." The transport team helped Tom move Cody's cage to the prepared enclosure. It was spacious and natural-looking, bordered by trees on one side and facing the Brennans' farmhouse on the other. They positioned the cage inside the enclosure, opened the door, and retreated outside the fence. "He'll come out when he's ready," Tom said as they locked the enclosure gate. "Best to give him space for now." For the rest of that first day, Cody remained inside the transport cage even though the door was open. Tom placed food and water nearby, but the bear didn't touch either. As night fell, Linda watched from the kitchen window, her face creased with concern. "He hasn't moved at all," she told Tom as he joined her at the window. "Not even to drink." Tom wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Give him time, Lynn. He's been through hell, and now he's in yet another strange place. Let's just be patient." Linda nodded, but her eyes remained fixed on the dark shape of the cage in the enclosure. "I just hope we're not too late." That night, as a light snow began to fall, Linda couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the bear cub, alone and frightened in the cold darkness. Around midnight, she got up, put on her warmest coat, and slipped outside. The enclosure was visible from the back porch, illuminated faintly by the moonlight reflecting off the snow. Linda could see that Cody had finally emerged from the transport cage, but he hadn't gone far. He was huddled against the fence, as far from the house as possible, his dark fur dusted with snowflakes. Linda sat on the porch steps, keeping her distance but making her presence known. "Hello, Cody," she said softly. "I'm Linda. You are safe here." The bear didn't respond, didn't even look in her direction. Linda hadn't expected him to. She simply sat there in the quiet night, letting him know he wasn't alone. After about an hour, the cold driving through her coat, she went back inside. The next day, Tom constructed a small shelter near the house where they could sit and observe Cody without intruding on his space. Linda brought her knitting, working on a scarf as she sat watching the bear. Cody remained distant, eating only when no humans were present and cowering at any sudden movements or sounds. Days passed this way. Tom and Linda established a routine, taking turns sitting in the shelter, talking softly to Cody, even though he showed no sign of listening. They discovered quickly that he was especially terrified of any metallic sounds. The clink of keys or the rattle of chains would send him into a state of panic, pressing himself against the ground and trembling violently. "Someone chained him," Tom said grimly after witnessing one such episode. "Probably kept him in a small space. Maybe even beat him. No wonder he's so traumatized." On the 7th night, as a light drizzle fell, Linda sat in the shelter with her knitting. The repetitive click of the needles was soothing, and she found herself humming softly, an old lullaby she used to sing to her son Michael, who had passed away from leukemia 15 years earlier. She didn't even realize she was doing it until she noticed Cody's ears twitching, his head slightly raised as if listening. Linda continued humming, her heart quickening. It was the first sign of interest Cody had shown in anything they did. When she finally went inside that night, she told Tom about it, her eyes bright with cautious hope. "Music," Tom mused. "Interesting. Maybe it reminds him of before he was captured. Bears have excellent hearing, you know." The next day, Tom brought his old guitar out to the shelter. He played softly while Linda hummed, and again, Cody's ears twitched in response. It wasn't much, but it was something, a tiny crack in the wall Cody had built around himself. They continued this way, adding music to their routine. Linda would knit and hum, and Tom would sometimes play guitar. They noticed small changes in Cody. He would sometimes lift his head when they arrived, his ears would perk up at the sound of Linda's humming, and once, he even approached the food they left while Linda was still present, though he retreated quickly when she shifted position. On day 18, Linda was sitting alone in the shelter during a light drizzle, knitting and humming as usual. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't immediately notice Cody had moved. When she finally looked up, she gasped softly. The bear cub was standing just a few feet away, watching her with an intensity that hadn't been there before. Linda froze, hardly daring to breathe. Cody took another step forward, then another. His movements were hesitant, his body language tense with fear, but he kept coming. When he reached Linda, he paused, sniffing the air, then, with agonizing slowness, he lowered his head and gently rested it on her lap. Tears sprang to Linda's eyes, rolling down her cheeks and mingling with the drizzle. She remained perfectly still, afraid that any movement might shatter this fragile moment of trust. Cody stayed that way for perhaps a minute, his head heavy on her lap, before he withdrew and retreated to a safe distance. That night, Linda told Tom what had happened, her voice choked with emotion. "He chose to come to me, Tom. He initiated contact." Tom squeezed her hand. "That's huge, Lynn. That's the first step." From that day on, Cody began to open up. The changes were subtle at first. He would come a little closer each day, stay a little longer. They discovered he preferred salmon to honey and would eat more willingly if Linda sat a few meters away humming her lullaby. He developed a peculiar habit of sleeping while hugging a pillow that Tom had left in his enclosure, pressing his face into it as if seeking comfort. Most mornings, Cody would make a low rumbling sound when he saw the couple through the window, a sound that Tom jokingly called his "good morning grumble." He began to explore his enclosure more, occasionally climbing the logs they had positioned for him or dipping his paws in the small pond. One crisp morning, about a month after Cody's arrival, Linda was in the garden near the enclosure when she spotted a coyote slinking along the fence line. Before she could react, she saw Cody rise from his resting spot and move deliberately toward the fence, positioning himself between the coyote and Rosie, who had been lying in the sun nearby. The coyote paused, assessed the situation, then trotted away. Rosie, who had been wary of Cody until then, seemed to understand what had happened. From that day on, the border collie began to spend more time near Cody's enclosure, sometimes lying just on the other side of the fence while Cody rested nearby. It was as if the bear's protective gesture had broken through Rosie's shell of fear just as Linda's lullabies had begun to break through Cody's. The transformation continued day by day. Cody became more animated, more engaged with his surroundings. He would watch with curious eyes as Tom worked in the yard or follow Linda's movements as she hung laundry on the line. The empty look that had haunted his eyes when he first arrived was gradually replaced by something else, a warm alertness, a cautious but growing connection to the world around him. "He's coming back to life," Linda told Tom one evening as they watched Cody from the kitchen window. The bear was playing with a large branch, batting it around his enclosure with surprising dexterity. "It's like watching a flower bloom in slow motion." Tom nodded, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "He's not out of the woods yet. He still has a lot of trauma to work through. But he's fighting his way back." They sent regular updates to Dr. Willis and Jennifer Morrison, including videos of Cody's progress. Dr. Willis was cautiously optimistic, noting that while Cody's behavior was improving, he was still far from being a candidate for release into the wild. "He's forming attachments to humans," she pointed out during a phone call. "That's good for his psychological recovery, but it means he'll likely never be able to survive on his own in the wild." "We know," Tom replied, "but at least he's living now, not just existing." The weeks turned into months. Winter deepened, blanketing the farm in snow. Cody's enclosure was equipped with a heated shelter, but he often chose to sleep outside, seemingly unbothered by the cold. Beneath his growing coat, his body filled out as his appetite improved, and though he would always have a limp from his improperly healed leg, he moved with increasing confidence and agility. Then came the night that changed everything. It was early December, and a fierce storm had descended upon the region. Wind howled around the farmhouse, driving snow against the windows in icy sheets. Tom was concerned about the heating system in Cody's shelter and decided to check it despite the weather. "I'll be quick," he assured Linda, pulling on his heavy coat and boots. "Just want to make sure he stays warm tonight." Linda watched from the window as Tom made his way through the swirling snow toward Cody's enclosure. She saw him reach the gate, fumble with the latch, and step inside. Then suddenly, he disappeared from view. Minutes passed, and Tom didn't reappear. Worry gnawed at Linda's stomach. She was about to put on her own coat and go check when she heard a strange sound at the back door, a scratching followed by a low, urgent grumbling. Linda hurried to the door and flung it open. There, standing on the back porch, was Cody. Snow clung to his dark fur, and his eyes were wide with what Linda immediately recognized as panic. The gate to his enclosure must not have been properly secured, allowing him to push it open. For a moment, Linda was frozen with shock at the sight of the 200-pound bear standing unrestrained before her. Then she realized what Cody's presence might mean. "Tom," she called out into the storm. There was no answer. Cody turned and moved back toward the yard, then stopped and looked back at Linda, grumbling again. His meaning was unmistakable: "Follow me." Heart pounding, Linda grabbed a flashlight and followed Cody into the storm. The bear led her straight to Tom's crumpled form near the enclosure. He had slipped on a patch of ice and fallen awkwardly, his leg bent at an unnatural angle beneath him. He was unconscious, his face alarmingly pale in the beam of the flashlight. "Tom," Linda cried, dropping to her knees beside her husband. She checked his pulse, it was there but weak. His skin was cold to the touch. He'd been lying in the snow for too long. Cody stood nearby, watching with anxious eyes as Linda pulled out her phone and dialed 911. Then, as if understanding the gravity of the situation, he moved closer to Tom and lay down beside him, pressing his warm body against Tom's cold one. Linda understood at once what Cody was doing, using his body heat to warm Tom, just as a mother bear would warm her cubs. She joined them, huddling against Tom's other side while they waited for the ambulance. The paramedics arrived 20 minutes later, their faces registering shock at the sight that greeted them. An elderly woman and a black bear huddled protectively on either side of an unconscious man. "It's okay," Linda assured them, as Cody reluctantly moved away from Tom at her gentle urging. "He's helping." Tom was rushed to the hospital with a broken leg and severe hypothermia. If he'd been out there much longer, the outcome could have been very different, the doctor told Linda later. "Another 15 minutes, and we might have lost him to hypothermia." While Tom recovered in the hospital, Linda returned home to find Cody back in his enclosure, the gate now properly secured. When he saw her, he rose up on his hind legs and pressed his paws against the fence, grumbling softly. Linda approached the fence, tears in her eyes. "You saved him," she whispered, reaching through the fence to stroke Cody's fur. "You're no longer the one being rescued. You're the protector of this family now." When Tom returned from the hospital a week later, his leg in a cast and crutches under his arms, Cody's reaction was remarkable. The bear paced anxiously along the fence until Tom came close enough to see, then sat back on his haunches and released a low rumbling sound that seemed to vibrate through the winter air. "He was worried about you," Linda said, helping Tom to a chair they'd positioned near the enclosure. Tom reached a hand toward the fence, and Cody approached, sniffing his fingers before gently pressing his nose against them through the wire. "Thank you, buddy," Tom said, his voice gruff with emotion. "I owe you one." In the weeks that followed, as Tom's leg healed, his bond with Cody deepened. The bear would watch attentively as Tom performed his physical therapy exercises in the yard, sometimes mimicking the movements in what Linda called a bear therapy. When Tom graduated from crutches to a cane, Cody grumbled his approval. And when Tom finally walked unassisted for the first time, the bear stood up on his hind legs as if applauding. It became clear to Tom and Linda that Cody could never return to the wild. He was too habituated to humans, too attached to them specifically. But keeping him permanently would require special permits and modifications to his living conditions. "We need to apply for a permanent residency license," Tom told Linda one evening as they watched Cody from the porch. The bear was playing with a large rubber ball, batting it around his enclosure with surprising dexterity. "It won't be easy to get, but I think we can make a case for it." Linda nodded. "After what he did for you, how could they say no?" They contacted Jennifer Morrison at Wild Art Sanctuary, who helped them navigate the complex application process. They submitted documentation of Cody's rescue and rehabilitation, veterinary assessments, and detailed plans for his long-term care. Most compelling was the account of how Cody had saved Tom's life during the snowstorm, evidence of the extraordinary bond that had formed between the bear and his caretakers. 3 months later, the license was granted. Cody would be allowed to remain permanently at the Brennan farm under certain conditions. His enclosure needed to be expanded, and he would require regular veterinary checkups. Tom and Linda would need to maintain proper liability insurance and allow periodic inspections by wildlife officials. With the license secured, they immediately began expanding Cody's living space. The new enclosure covered nearly an acre, incorporating natural features like trees and rocks. They built a covered walkway connecting it to an area near the house, allowing Cody more freedom while still maintaining necessary safety boundaries. And as spring arrived, bringing fresh growth to the Wyoming landscape, Cody continued to flourish. His coat grew thick and glossy, shining like polished onyx in the sunlight. He developed a playful streak, splashing in his pond and rolling in patches of clover. He showed particular fascination with maple leaves, carefully selecting the prettiest ones that Linda brought him from the garden. Rosie, the once timid border collie, became Cody's unlikely companion. The two formed an odd friendship, bear calm and dog anxious, but they seemed to understand each other in a way that transcended species. They would often lie on opposite sides of the fence, mirroring each other's positions as they napped in patches of sunlight. Tom and Linda adopted another dog that summer, Baxter, an elderly golden retriever whose owner had passed away. Gentle and arthritic, Baxter immediately took to Cody, often sleeping pressed against the fence of the enclosure. Cody would reach a paw through the wire to gently touch Baxter's fur, a gesture of affection that never failed to move Linda to tears. A routine developed. In the mornings, Cody would greet Tom and Linda with his familiar grumble, accepting apple slices from their hands. During the day, he would play, explore, or simply watch as life unfolded around him. In the evenings, as the sun set behind the mountains, he would make what Linda called his good-night rounds, moving along the fence to touch noses with Rosie, press his face against Baxter's cheek, and finally receive a gentle scratch behind the ears from Tom and Linda. Then he would retreat to his favorite spot beneath a spruce tree, curling up with the pillow he still loved to hug, releasing soft, warm grunts that sounded remarkably like the forest wind. "He's talking to the trees," Linda would say, telling them about his day. Tom would smile and squeeze her hand. "Maybe he is." One day in early autumn, nearly 2 years after Cody's arrival, they received a call from Dr. Margaret Willis. She was passing through Wyoming and asked if she might visit to see Cody. Tom and Linda readily agreed. When Dr. Willis arrived the next day, she barely recognized the bear she had once deemed beyond saving. Cody was standing in his enclosure, his powerful shoulders supporting a healthy weight, his once dull fur now gleaming in the September sunshine. He was using a branch to try to reach a particularly tempting blackberry that had grown just outside his fence, his movements displaying intelligence and purpose. "I can't believe it," Dr. Willis said, her voice hushed with amazement. "Is that really Cody?" As if hearing his name, the bear turned to look at her. There was no fear in his gaze, no emptiness, only a calm curiosity as he assessed the newcomer. "That's our boy," Tom confirmed proudly. "Hard to believe he's the same bear." "Isn't it?" she said, shaking her head, tears welling in her eyes. "I thought he wouldn't make it. I was certain we were just prolonging his suffering by sending him here. He just needed to find the right people," Tom said, watching as Cody abandoned his berry quest to approach the fence, sniffing the air curiously. "Sometimes we all do." They spent the afternoon showing Dr. Willis how far Cody had come. They demonstrated his favorite games, his interactions with Rosie and Baxter, the way he would gently take treats from their hands. Dr. Willis marveled at the goodnight rounds, visibly moved by the ritual that so clearly demonstrated Cody's integration into this unusual family. "In all my years of wildlife rehabilitation," she admitted as they sat on the porch later, watching the sun set over the mountains, "I've never seen anything quite like this. It challenges everything I thought I knew about rehabilitation protocols." "Every animal is different," Linda said, her eyes on Cody as he dozed beneath his spruce tree. "Just like people. Sometimes the protocols work, and sometimes you need to find another way." That evening, after Dr. Willis had departed with promises to visit again, Tom, Linda, and the dogs gathered on the porch as usual. Tom sat in his favorite chair, braiding a rope toy for Rosie. Linda read a book, occasionally glancing up to check on Cody. Rosie and Baxter dozed nearby, comfortable in the cool evening air. As darkness fell, Cody began his good-night rounds. He moved to the section of fence nearest Rosie, touching noses with the border collie. He shifted to press his face against Baxter's cheek, receiving a sleepy tail wag in response. Finally, he approached the part of the fence closest to Tom and Linda. Linda set aside her book and went to him, reaching through the wire to stroke his fur. "Good night, sweet boy," she whispered. Tom joined her, his hand finding the spot behind Cody's ears that the bear particularly enjoyed. "Sleep well, buddy." Cody leaned into their touch, releasing one of his soft rumbling sounds. A sound that had become as familiar and comforting to Tom and Linda as the crackle of their fireplace or the whisper of wind through the pines. As they turned to go inside, Linda paused, her hand on the door. "You know what he's saying, don't you?" she asked softly. Tom smiled, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "What's that?" "He's saying thank you. Not just because we saved him, but because we let him save us too." They looked back at Cody, who had returned to his spot beneath the spruce tree. He was curled around his pillow, his breathing already deepening towards sleep, his dark form barely visible in the gathering darkness. Inside, the fire crackled in the hearth. Snow had begun to fall beyond the windows, the first of the season, light and tentative. Tom and Linda settled into their evening routine, moving around each other with the easy familiarity of decades together. Yet there was something different about them now, something that hadn't been there before Cody entered their lives. Perhaps it was a newfound purpose, a reminder that healing was possible even after the deepest wounds. Perhaps it was the simple joy of watching something broken become whole again. Or perhaps it was the profound understanding that rescue wasn't always a one-way street, that sometimes, in saving another, we ourselves are saved. Whatever it was, it filled the small farmhouse with a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire in the hearth. Outside, Cody slept peacefully beneath his spruce tree, snow gathering on his glossy fur, a bear once left to die, now deeply and irrevocably home. In the morning, he would rise and greet the day with his familiar grumble. Tom would bring him fresh salmon, and Linda would read on the porch while Rosie and Baxter played in the yard. Life would continue in its new pattern, different from what any of them had expected, but somehow exactly as it should be. For now, though, they rested, bear and humans and dogs, each in their own space, but connected by invisible threads of care and gratitude. The fire popped and hissed. The snow fell silently. And in that small corner of Wyoming, a family not born but chosen slept beneath the same vast sky, their hearts beating in a rhythm as ancient and true as the wilderness itself. Family isn't where you're born. It's where love chooses you.